Welcome to this webinar, Generate Smarter Solutions and Reduce Your Stress Level with the Three-Circle Tool. I'm David Lee from Human Nature at Work. So as you can see in our little diagram here, the three-circle tool consists of three concentric circles: the circle of control, the circle of influence, and the circle of adaptability. So things that you can adapt to even though you can't change. Now, I started using this tool about 10 or 15 years ago in the programs I did on resilience and managing change. And what I found was in program evaluations that repeatedly this was the part of the program that people said they found to be most useful. And so I started including it in other webinars or seminars, whether it was management development, communication skills, etc. And still this tool kept coming up as the most useful part of the program, regardless of the topic. So I decided to isolate it and teach it on its own. So here's the three-circle tool can do for you. It can help you make the smartest, wisest decisions. And you'll see that as we go through how to use it, because it really clears your mind, clears your head, so you're able to think precisely about whatever the situation is that you're dealing with, rather than getting caught up in the drama, the frustration, the anger, the resentment, the fear. It also, part of how it helps you clear your head is that it helps you get clear on what are your specific options and choices. Oftentimes whether it's dealing with a difficult person or some type of life situation we feel confused about, it's easy in the confusion to not see all the different options and choices we have. The three-circle tool allows you to do that. One of the other really powerful things that you'll find this can do for you is that it helps you let go of things you cannot change. And one of the biggest sources of stress I've found over the last 30 years of working in the area of stress management and resilience, and also working on that with myself, is that one of the biggest sources of stress for us is when we keep focusing on things that we can't do a darn thing about. And all that does is leave us feeling helpless and frustrated. It also will help you identify and eliminate stress-producing thoughts and attitudes. So even in situations that you can't change, but you therefore need to know how to adapt to, one of the things that you can do about those situations is change what you're saying to yourself, change the beliefs that you have about the situation. And when I say change the beliefs, we'll get into this more, obviously. But when I say change the beliefs, I don't mean trying to kid yourself into believing something that's nonsensical. I mean hard-nosed, clear-thinking, challenging of counterproductive beliefs. And we'll get into that too. So it also helps keep yourself accountable. And what I mean by that is that the three-circle tool helps you identify the choices that you do have. And so if you choose not to make a particular choice, rather than convince yourself that's not an option, it helps you be honest with yourself and saying, that is an option, but I choose not to engage it. So let me give you an example. Think of somebody in your life that you find difficult, and you know you need to have a conversation with them about whatever the issue is. And just the thought of having the conversation, sends chills down your spine. Now, you can choose to have the conversation, no matter how anxious you feel, no matter how difficult they are. The three-circle tool sort of forces you to acknowledge that is an option that I do have. And if you choose not to have the conversation and say, okay, I'm not willing to have that conversation, what other options do I have, and what can I do about the situation given that I'm not willing to have the conversation? The three-circle tool allows you to be clear that you're choosing not to have the conversation and therefore need to have an alternative strategy, versus what a lot of people would do would say, oh, there's no way I can talk with her about that. She's just so antagonistic, or she'll just get so defensive, or she'll pay me back in some way, find some way to pay me back if I have the conversation. So of course, there's no way I'm going to do that. Do you know what I mean? So oftentimes we convince ourselves that something is an option, is not an option when it really is. Or let's say somebody's working for a really abusive boss and they say, I'm going to stick it out until retirement because there's no way I'll find a job that pays this well, or I don't want to lose my pension, or whatever it is. And they convince themselves they have no options. When they do have an option, they can choose to leave. I'm not saying that's a good option, but that is an option. So it helps us get clear on what our options are, so we hold ourselves accountable. And there's actually a measure of serenity that we get when we acknowledge, I'm not willing to make this choice, and so I will make some other choice and do things that make these alternative choices as good as possible. There's some measure of serenity that we get by acknowledging that we do have this unpleasant choice as an option, but we choose not to make it, versus telling ourselves there's nothing I can do. And that brings us to one of the 6 ways that the three-circle tool is helpful, because we acknowledge what our choices are, whether we choose to make those choices or not, or particular choice or not, and because it helps us identify those things that we can't do a darn thing about, and therefore we don't waste our time and energy obsessing about things we can't change. It helps us stay out of the feeling of victimhood and helplessness, which in and of themselves are pretty unpleasant situations or emotions to be in. But also, what we know about the mind-body connection, as long as we're feeling helpless, we're not able to think clearly about creative options. So that's another reason why it's so important to stay out of that feeling of victimhood and helplessness. And so the reverse happens. The three-circle tool helps us not only feel, but be more in charge of your life. Helps us be in charge of our life, you be in charge of your life, because it helps you drill down into what are my options, what are the things that I can do to solve this problem, to capitalize on this opportunity, and then what are the things I can't change, and therefore I'm not going to waste my time or energy on those. And then last but certainly not least, it helps you dramatically reduce your stress level, because, and you'll see as we go through this, the more proficient you are in the three-circle tool, the more you're able to identify those stress-producing thoughts and beliefs that are counterproductive, the more clear you are on, here's what I want in the situation, here are the steps that I can take to make that happen. The more clear you are on, these are things I can do, these are things I can change, and these are things I cannot change, so I'm not going to waste my time obsessing about those. The more clear you are in all these different areas, the more you go in to the more you go into a situation, face a situation with a clear head and a calm heart. And so I shared with you these, here's what the three-circle tool can do for you, because I obviously want you to benefit from this really powerful tool. And the only way you'll benefit from it is if you actually practice and use it. And the only way that you'll practice and use it is if you really get the incredible benefit of this tool to you. All right, let's move on. So I want to give credit where credit is due. The idea for this actually came from Stephen Covey. And if you're familiar with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he wrote about the circle of concern and the circle of influence. And I loved that model, but as I read about it over and over and contemplated it, it really hit me that there needed to be a third circle. And here's what I mean. Let me just give you a brief background in case you're not familiar with 7 Habits. So he talked about the circle of concern. And so everything inside the circle of concern is something that you're, strangely enough, concerned about or concerns you. So it could be major things like your career, your relationships, project that you're working on, as well as simple things like what you're having for lunch. Even though that's not a big major life issue, you care about whether you have a good lunch or not. Everything outside the circle of concern doesn't concern you. You don't really care about, you don't think about. So I oftentimes use, let's say if I'm doing a program, a live program in New England, and I might say, so chances are what the weather is in Topeka, Kansas is outside your circle of concern unless you're flying there tomorrow or you have family in Topeka, Kansas. If you live in Topeka, the weather would be in your circle of concern. So you're with me on that, hopefully. Now, as you can see on our little diagram here, inside the circle of concern is the circle of influence. And so of all the things in your life that you're concerned about or concern you, are relevant to your happiness, your success, your effectiveness, etc., there's a smaller subset which are those things that you can influence. So for instance, you can influence, in Stephen Covey's world, you can influence whether you get up early in the morning versus get up late and rush around. You can influence whether people listen to your ideas. You can influence whether people get defensive when you give them feedback. You can influence whether you get that job promotion. Okay? Now here's where the imprecision, in my opinion, comes into play. That Stephen Covey didn't differentiate between things that you can control and things that you can influence. So he would talk about things that you can directly influence and things that you can indirectly influence. So an indirect influence would be whether somebody listened to your feedback and did something with it, or whether they got defensive by in response to your feedback and rejected it. He would call that indirect influence. What he would call direct influence would be whether you practiced how you would bring up the issue to the person. Now, as I studied and reflected on the direct versus indirect, what hit me was what he talked about as direct influence really was what could be an extra circle, was your circle of control. These are things that you can literally decide whether they happened or did not happen. And what he called indirect influence were more precisely things that you could influence but not control. So that's where I added the extra circle. So I'll give you an example of the difference between control and influence. And this is an example I give in seminars all the time. I'll ask the group, coming to work on time, is that in your circle of control or your circle of influence? So remember, the circle of influence is things that, since it's outside your circle of control, these are things that you can influence whether they happen or not, but you can't literally control them. So getting to work on time, is it in your circle of influence or control? And regardless of the seminar, regardless of the group, typically there'll be people who will say, oh, it's in your circle of control. Others will say, nope, circle of influence. And then every now and then somebody will say, well, it's sort of in your circle of control. And my response to that is always, it's either inside or out. It's sort of like you can't be sort of pregnant. Either you're pregnant or you're not. You're either in that circle or you're out. And then the person will say, well, what about if you start off early enough, but there's a traffic jam or a traffic accident? bingo. That's one of the situations that you can't control, you can't influence. Well, I guess, yeah, you can make sure you're not the one who causes the accident. So getting to work on time is actually in your circle of influence. You can't 100% control that that happens all the time. Therefore, it's not in your circle of control, but you certainly can influence whether you get to work on time. And so then in the group, what we do is say, okay, what's in your circle of control that if you did these things would increase your ability to influence whether you get to work on time? So make sure you get up early, set your alarm clock early, get your clothes out, make sure your car has enough gas in the tank, your car is maintained so it doesn't break down regularly. Give yourself enough leeway in time, so if there is a traffic jam, unless it's an outrageous one, chances are you'll get there on time. You get where I'm saying? So what I found over the years is whether it's getting people to be able to hear what you have to say, whether it's getting a better job, whether it's influencing your boss to stop micromanaging you, whether it's to influence a team member to behave in ways that make them a better team member, etc. Those are all things that you can potentially influence, but you can't control. That being said, there are lots of things that are within your circle of control, lots of choices that you have that will dramatically affect whether you influence the outcome you want or not. So you see how that extra circle gives you more precision, and as we go on teaching you how to use this, you'll obviously see this in more depth. But what I found over the years is it gives people more precision in their thought process and their planning process by separating out circle of control versus circle of influence. So I've talked about circle of control, circle of influence, and then the outer ring, the circle of adaptability, or the things that you can adapt to. These consist of things that you can neither control nor influence. And by definition in the diagram, if it falls in that outside ring, it's outside your circle of control, your circle of influence. So the weather, the economy would be examples. Somebody's personality disorder that you're dealing with, unless you have magical therapeutic powers, you can't change their personality disorder. And we'll go into more depth each circle and how to use them. But that's the three-circle tool. So let's talk about how to use the three-circle tool. And so the situation we'll use is a teammate behaving badly. So whether it's they're rude, whether they're gossiping all the time, whether they're really negative and always complaining, whatever it is, teammate behaving badly. So how do you use the three-circle tool to get clear on what can I do about in this situation, and what are the things that I can't do anything about and I need to figure out healthy ways of adapting. So we start off with the circle of control. So the circle of control is in many ways also can be thought of as a circle of choice. Inside your circle of control are the choices you've had. And when I've analyzed and really reflected on all the different things that we can control in any situation, I've boiled it down into basically three things. We can control our attention, where we focus our attention. We can control our thoughts, and that oftentimes takes a lifetime of practice to get really good at it. And we can control our actions. And as part of controlling actions, also that includes our reactions. So let's drill down into each of these. So let's start off with controlling our focus of attention. I love this quote from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. if I'm saying I practiced it and felt so proud of myself, and I think that's how it is. And actually, I think it's Mahai. Check sent Mahai. Anyway, we don't need to focus on that. We can focus on his really good quote: to control attention means to control experience and therefore the quality of life. So a simple example, back to things that we cannot change. If we focus our attention on things that we cannot change, that just makes us go through life feeling helpless and victimized. If we focus on things that we can do something about, we can change, we feel empowered, we feel energized. So, incredibly powerful, simple tool is being more mindful of where we focus our attention. It's just like one of the resilience tools that I love to use is the old glass half empty or glass half full. In any situation, if we focus on how the glass is half empty in a situation, then that's going to create a negative emotional state. If we focus our attention on what are the good things, what are the, oh man, I'm really glad this didn't happen, our emotional state, it shifts our emotional state into a positive emotional state. So for instance, I just was delayed 3 hours flying back recently. And I had the choice of focusing my attention on I just want to get home and what a drag it is to be delayed for 3 hours, or I could focus my attention on, boy, I'm really thankful that I ended up not having to be delayed a full day like some of the people were. Okay. So let's look at what we can choose to focus on. We can focus on what we can't change or what we can change. We can focus on the other person's actions. Why did they do that? Who do they think they are? How can they be that way? Or we can focus on our actions and reactions. How can I act in ways that bring out the best in that person? How can I respond when they do X in a way that I feel proud of and could helpfully bring our relationship and our interactions to a higher level of functioning? We can tell ourselves how wrong or bad the other person is. Okay, so I sort of reflected that earlier. What a jerk he is, what a passive-aggressive person, blah, blah, blah. And putting all our energy into judging and labeling. Or we can look at our role and strategize how to best deal with what happened. So, what did I do and what can I do? We can obsess about why they did the thing that upset us. And there's a term for that called mind reading, also attribution. They're doing that because they're upset that I got promoted into the position of supervisor and they didn't. They're doing that because they don't like it that I, fill in the blank. Or we can focus on our attention about how we can best respond. We can focus on, as I mentioned before, what's wrong about a situation or what's right. We can focus on the downside or the opportunity. So think about any situation related to a teammate that is behaving badly and ask yourself, where are you focusing your attention? Because you see the items on the left, all that does, if we focus on that, is create stress, feelings of frustration, anger, resentment, helplessness, etc. If we focus on those things on the right, it helps us get into an energized, empowered, determined, all right, what can I do here mode. So let's talk specifically about focus of attention related to the teammate behaving badly scenario. So we can focus on our choices. So do I talk with them about it? Do I talk with them alone? Do I ask to meet with them and our mutual supervisor? Do I choose not to talk with them about it, but instead do plan B? We can focus our attention on how to manage our emotional state. So again, rather than spending all our time telling ourselves how bad they are and bad person, they shouldn't be that way, say, no, I'm going to focus on my emotions because I'm in charge of my emotional state. That's my responsibility. as I mentioned before, we can focus our attention on how we're going to respond. So if this person is gossiping, how do I want to respond? What is the best way for me to respond? If this person is being negative, or what I'm labeling as negative, how do I want to respond in that situation? And then if I choose to bring up the issue, what's the best way to bring up the issue? So you see the concept of, in our circle of control, or one of the components is where we focus our attention. Then there's what we do with our thought. So, what an idiot. I can't believe she said that. So we can have those kind of thoughts, or I don't know why she said that, and I'm not going to assume evil intent. And this is one of the best mantras that I've heard from other people that has really helped me when I've gotten into both the mind reading mode of telling myself they're doing X because they're trying to be mean, or they're unhappy person, or they're being passive aggressive, or whatever explanations I've come up with, is to remind myself what I've heard other people say, which is it's better to assume ignorance than evil intent. It's better to assume that they weren't thinking about what they said, they just sort of said it, or they're not aware of their effect on other people, than to assume they're doing it on purpose. And that each perception, whether it's they're doing it on purpose or they're not aware, either one is a guess. Either one might be true. And maybe as time goes on and we have conversations, we'll find out. I'll tell you, I've had enough conversations in my life where when I've checked out with somebody about, what was that all about? Oftentimes I've found that what I thought, excuse me for the voice breaking, I need to get a drink of water here. What I thought was their intention, I was dead wrong. And I bet you've received emails like that where you thought the person had an attitude, that there's some sort of antagonism in the email, and then when you checked out, it's like, no, they were just in a rush. They just whipped it off and didn't edit it for how friendly did it sound. So we have a choice over what type of thought we have. Another one. So another version of instead of what an idiot, I can't believe she said that, we could think, rather than assume she said that to be antagonistic, I'll ask her to clarify what she meant. So you see how that second thought takes away our stress. So we're not ruminating about what a bad person she is and feeling upset about her. We're just really clear about, I don't know why she said it, I'll check it out. The moment I bring it up, she's going to get defensive. So that's what we call fortune telling. Fortune telling is a cousin of mind reading. It's a classic stress producing cognitive distortion. It's when we tell ourselves we know what the future will bring. And so we can choose to have, remember, we're still in our circle of control, our thoughts, we can choose to tell ourselves that, or we can say, how can I bring this up in a way that would make it easy for her to hear what I have to say? So hopefully you're noticing this underlying theme of choosing more empowering, what's sometimes described as more resourceful responses. We'll do one, I think there's more here. What a freaking disaster. My whole day is ruined. So you get a flat on the way to work, your computer crashes, etc. So that would be an example of cognitive distortion, catastrophizing. So taking something that's a drag, that's annoying, that's frustrating, and making it into the end of the world and having it spill over into your whole day. We could think those thoughts, or is this going to be a big deal a year from now? Okay, and the answer is probably no. Okay, so do I want to ruin my day over it? And when I do my resilience, my stress management programs, oftentimes I point out that most of us get ourselves upset about things, I know I do, about things that they're not even going to be a big deal later on in the day. And so I find for myself, by saying, is this going to be a big deal later on in the day, by challenging myself, it helps sort of like throw cold water in my face and get a grip and not be so upset about something that I don't have to make myself upset about. Notice I just said I don't have to make myself upset about, because what we do with our thoughts, what we do with our beliefs creates, to a large degree, our emotions. Okay, so let's talk about how can you engage in empowering thoughts related to the teammate behaving badly situation. So in our circle of control, we can control our thoughts. So we can say to ourselves, they're just doing this to be difficult. So again, that's mind reading. We can choose to have that thought. We have that right to have the thought. The consequence is we're going to be angry and resentful and stressed out, and more likely, because we're in that emotional state, not only are we making ourselves miserable, but also we're probably going to interact with them in an antagonistic way, even if we're not doing it on purpose, because our emotions are affecting the way we act and are affecting our voice tone, and they pick up on it. We can say, oh, there's nothing I can do about it. That's just how they are. And so, remember I talked about earlier related to accountability? So we can convince ourselves we have no choices here. We can convince ourselves they really make me mad, so we can make them responsible for our emotional state. And then we can do a negative judgment. What a jerk. What a, pain in the neck. What a whatever negative judgment that you apply to them. Or we can engage in more productive self-talk and thoughts. We might say they might not be aware of how they affect others, so we're having some compassion for them. Notice the difference that perspective will create in our own emotional state. Forget about how it will affect the way we treat them. The benefit, a lot of the benefit of controlling our thoughts and having more productive thoughts accrues to us. It helps us feel better. I will focus on what I can change, not on what I can't. So remember, we've talked about that. So continuing to remind yourself, and this is something that I do, is I'll say, there's nothing I can do about that. I'm responsible for the things that I can do things about. All right, what can I do? I'm responsible for my emotional state. So if you keep reminding yourself of that versus they made me mad, they hurt my feelings, we're responsible for our emotional state. Because, and I could do a whole seminar just on that, but just think about, haven't you ever noticed how two people can be in the same situation that would be labeled stressful, and one person gets all stressed out and the other person doesn't? It's not the external situation or the other person that creates the emotions. We create our emotional state by the things that we think, by the images we create in our mind, which we won't go into in this webinar, and the beliefs that we have. And we'll talk more about how to positively affect emotional state. So telling yourself, I'm responsible for my emotional state. And then they're doing the best they can with the skills they have and the beliefs they have. And this is one of the most freeing perspectives I think you'll find. And I've really found it helpful over the years. And I've had several different friends and several different sources I've studied from who have been instrumental in reminding me of this. That for the most part, even that most obnoxious life form that you deal with at work, for the most part, people are not consciously trying to be difficult. Everybody in their own strange little unique way is trying to satisfy their basic human needs, trying to do what will bring them some measure of comfort, happiness, feeling secure, feeling safe, etc. The things that we all need. And just like that little kid, let's say in school, who the other kids and the teachers especially felt were obnoxious, they always interrupted or said obnoxious things, that they were starving for attention and they hadn't learned about productive ways of getting attention, and because everybody needs some level of being noticed in the world, they discovered obnoxious ways of getting attention. And if they knew more positive ways of having people notice them, they certainly would choose those. So maybe using that as an analogy to help you have more compassion for, let's say, the person who's really bossy or controlling or really negative, or just acts in a primitive, unevolved way, that's as good as it gets for them right now. And I don't mean that in a patronizing kind of way or, oh, we're superior kind of way, but it also speaks to another belief that a friend and mentor of mine has really helped me with and sort of instill in my consciousness, is that if you're dealing with somebody who's operating on a fairly primitive or unevolved level, it's the responsibility of the more mature, more competent, more evolved, whatever term you want to use, person to lead the way in both behaving in more productive ways and having conversations that can lead to better relationship and higher functioning. And I say that because oftentimes, whether it's at seminars or if I'm coaching somebody and we're talking about how to deal with somebody who's behaving badly and how they can initiate conversations, every now and then somebody will say, why do I have to be the one to take the high road? Why do I have to be the one to bring up the issue? They're the ones who are causing the problems. And so that's where I bring up the issue that, well, you're operating at a higher level than they are. You're the more advanced life form, if you will. And so it falls on your shoulders to lead the way. I mean, you can choose not to. That's in your circle of control, your circle of choice. But if you do want the situation to be better, i.e., you want to influence the situation, what's in your circle of control is whether you lead the way or not. So that's a little kind of philosophical background to that piece. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I notice it says 36 minutes and now it's 43 seconds. I'm going to stop the webinar at this point so you have a bite-sized chunk. It's actually a little more than a bite-sized chunk, but it'll get you, I wanted to give you as much detail so you can actually apply this. So this is turning out to be longer than I originally intended, but hopefully you find it useful doing it at that level of depth. So I'm going to stop this and start up part 2.